Hello and welcome to the Powerhouse Woman Show. It's where we talk to the most amazing women about what they're doing, what they're passionate about, what their purpose is about, and how they can help inspire you as well. What happens when you live on purpose in your work, in your life in general? And what does purpose really mean? And what's the difference between passion and meaning and purpose? We're going to delve right into those questions, and we're delighted to have as our guest today Dr. Alise Cortez, organizational psychologist. She is also Chief Ignition Officer with Gusto Now, a speaker, an amazing MC. And I saw her in person, so I'm not just making this up, and she's an author. I think I have it right of 4 books right now, correct?
Five.
Okay, 5 books. Quickly, what are your 5 book titles?
Purpose Ignited, The Great Revitalization, Passionately Striving and Why, Coloring Life, and The Power of Soulful Healing.
The Power of Soulful Healing. Well, we met in Chicago, and you are amazing. And I'm so glad that you're on the show to talk about a topic that is so powerful, maybe so misunderstood, if I were to give purpose a characterization. So, we're going to talk about purpose, working on purpose, which is also the name of your podcast. Congratulations. You've now done this podcast for 10 years. Most people quit after 10 episodes, but you have been doing it for 10 years. Let's talk about purpose. What is it? And I'm not trying to be flip, but I can't get 2 people to agree on what it is. So let's ask the expert. What is it?
Thanks, Monica. There are various ways of looking at purpose. It's so great to be on the show with you, by the way. Thanks for having me. So, purpose is often conflated with meaning. And as you know, I'm also, in addition to being an organizational psychologist, I'm a logotherapist, which is where the meaning camp comes in. So purpose really, from my vantage point, and there are various ways to identify it and to define it, but really, first and foremost, it is that overarching characterization or way to be able to navigate our lives. And so I like to think of it as an overarching principle that organizes our choices, our decision, direction, et cetera, kind of like the overall house structure, if you will. And the other part about purpose that's really interesting that I think is why people are so compelled by it, Monica, is it's connected to potential. So people recognize that part of the reason that they so yearn for purpose is they know it has something to do with realizing their potential. And I had Alicia Hare in my podcast some years ago, and she talks about purpose as really being that when we live it fully, when we live our purpose fully, guides us to the fullness of our potential. So I really like that a lot. And it really gives us that why to get up for in the morning and keep us powered and nurtured and energized to go after things that would otherwise seem impossible or easy to give up on.
That is really, really powerful, especially the part when we live it, fully. And I had a conversation. I interviewed someone one time, and she basically said that everybody's trying to find their purpose when, in her view, in her spiritual walk, we're already our purpose. And whether or not we have a name for it is a different story. So, do we know what our purpose is? Or are we in this constant mode of trying to discover it and live it?
Woo, that is a great and deep question. So, and we could spend lots of time focusing on that. Now, there's a couple of ways to answer that question, Monica. One is if you're of the camp that believes that purpose has been given to you, you are anointed with it, if you will, almost from the point of from spiritual being, your God, whatever your faith is. But then there is that idea that it has been bestowed upon you, and that's where some people have a kind of a hang up because not everybody is connected to a faith or a religion. I happen to be of the camp that you can detect your purpose, but it is really in relation to considering also what lights you up from within, which is going to align with both your passion, also your values, what the world needs, because purpose is always about serving beyond yourself, whether that is an, a person, a set of people, an entity, a community, or a cause. So that's the important thing about purpose. It's always about serving beyond yourself. There's an element of self transcendence in it. So I do believe that purpose does continue to evolve. And as the world calls forth what you can do, your skills, your talents, and what calls you, that it might get further directed or refined. And so I do believe that purpose is internally generated. It doesn't come from, somebody saying, hey, Monica, your purpose is to whatever, make the world shine, because I see that from without. Maybe it's shining from within you and I can detect it, but it is always coming from within.
Hmm. How would you differentiate or define other things that sometimes people may kind of confuse or think they're saying the same thing when it comes to purpose, passion, and meaning?
Hmm.
That's different than perhaps purpose.
I love that. I love that. Let me say this first because this is so powerful. Let me tell you what purpose is not. I was out speaking at a conference some years ago, and the speaker ahead of me belted out to the audience, my purpose is to double my income. And I wanted to throw up Monica because she had just severely misled the audience. That
Hmm.
is what we call a fabulous goal, but it is not purpose because it's self serving. That was just serving her.
It
And
wasn't
so
wrong, but it was self-serving.
it's not, but it's not purpose because it's
Right.
just simply a goal. So people
Mhm.
conflate all kinds of things with purpose, including meaning. So as a logotherapist, I differentiate meaning and purpose as follows. Purpose is that guiding light, that orienting directional focus that allows us to be able to understand, just how to get up from the dark path and keep going in this particular direction. Meaning is the fuel that guides us on that journey. So, through logotherapy, which is an existential psychology discipline that was given to us through Viktor Frankl and his work, and you might recognize his one of his main books, Man's Search for Meaning. One of my degrees is in logophilosophy. But through the vantage point of logotherapy, we have three sources of meaning available to us, which are always registered along our value system. So, what you find meaningful, Monica, will be different from what I find meaningful because we have different values. So, meaning is really our chief concern as humans through logotherapy. It's what we most care about, most yearn for, and it is our chief source of energy. So meaning is really that you can think of it as your energetic engine that allows you to pursue whatever is important to you in life, including your purpose, which is that directional sort of force that you're aiming your efforts and even your passions toward.
Wow. Okay, now we have some distinctions there. That's very, very good. So if you're struggling, because there could be some powerhouse women going, I'm doing a lot of things. I understand what you're saying. I just I want to have maybe a purpose driven life, if that is maybe contradictory. I'm not sure. Because it kind of seems like purpose should flow and not be something that you necessarily have to strive for. I'd like your thoughts on that. And if they're feeling that I would love to tap deeply into what my purpose is, how would they go about that?
Yeah, this is so yummy, Monica. Okay. Okay, so first I would say purpose can naturally flow, but pursuing it is a whole other matter, Monica. Man, I'm telling you, it can be a little bit persnickety, this purpose business. So I do feel called. I am called to live my purpose, which is to awaken people to their passion and purpose and then inspire them to make a contribution worthy of their one precious life, which is why I'm called the Chief Ignition Officer. But let me tell you something, this is not necessarily the easiest path when it comes to livelihood or finding more clients or whatever else it is. And sometimes, it would be easier just to go and do work that there's a call, an easy call for that particular set of skills and talents, and you're readily employed and have and paid accordingly. But the path to pursue your purpose can be quite difficult. And it does feel to me, and many others who are in this path, that you're being obedient to this call. And I am being obedient to this call. I believe in this down to my last toenail on the back 27,000 times. So, yes, pursuing it is something else. There are many people that I've met in my audiences over the years who either are both confounded that they haven't found their purpose yet, or they know it and they're feeling shy and embarrassed and maybe even ashamed that they haven't pursued it, even though they do know it. And that's because it's not easy.
Right.
So, and the other thing that I'll say about this, Monica, is that people confuse that purpose has to be, people think that Purpose has to be some really, really big, grand thing, or else it doesn't count as purpose. And I've had enough people on my podcast distinguishing little p purpose from big P purpose. So we can still be living our purpose if it's really something that we really believe in. This is something where we know we can make a contribution. This is important to us. We feel enlivened as we do so. And it might be that this is really about pouring yourself into a child, your child, someone else's child, children in a classroom, whatever it is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're out to stand for ending world hunger, which is, of course, what Lynn Twist set out to do many, many years ago.
Mm. You mentioned your podcast, Working on Purpose. And again, the milestone of 10 years this past February. That is amazing. How do you put people on your show? Because one of the things I'm fascinated by is that you say, I read their book, I read their entire book. Are you primarily looking for authors or people who've done research in the area of what you're talking about? Because I'm very curious that you sustained your audience and your guests for 10 years.
hmm Well, let me just be clear. When I started this podcast 10 plus years ago, in the beginning, I was scrambling for guests. I'd call my friends and say, "Hey, you're on the show tonight because I don't have a guest, right?"
The show
I
is
don't,
live.
and it's love. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but you're on. But of course, that's evolved tremendously over time, such that now, Monica, 98% and maybe 98.5% of my guests come to me through public relations representatives who reach out to me and say, "Hey, I have an author that I think would be great for your show." I prefer authors or someone who can provide me something that I can learn from, because that's part of my catalyzing engine to continue sharpening my own saw to keep learning and growing and developing a stronger base of value for my clients that I serve. So my preference is always to interview authors. And to your point, my methodology is when I say, yes, I'd love to have this author on the show, send me the book. They said they mail me a hard copy of the book. I read the book cover to cover. I
Mhm.
highlight in the book the sections that I know I want to talk about. Then I take about 25 to 50 pages of typewritten notes from the book every single week, which becomes fodder for research for my books, for my talks. When I cite, like just this week, my Gusto Now Academy, we were working on a topic relative to diversity and inclusion, and I was able to cite directly from the previous night's show. That's how fresh the material
Wow.
is.
Yeah.
So I vastly appreciate people that have written something that I can learn from, whether it's articles, books. Occasionally, I'll bring on a subject matter author or expert and just take from, and pull from their expertise. One of my favorite, I've had many amazing people on, but Bill George was on my podcast many years ago. Of course, the North Purpose star, guy, and the previous CEO of Medtronic. And he said, at least that was one of the best interviews I've had in 10 years. I said, could you put that in writing?
Yes. We'll take that. We'll take that. Absolutely. You are an organizational psychologist. For those of us who are not familiar with that, what does that mean? How do you work with people? And how do you share your brilliance with them? Because it sounds so fascinating.
It is. Well, the easiest way to distinguish it, Monica, so keyword is organizational. So I care about the world of work. So contrast that to, say, a clinical psychologist, which is where you're really focused on what's nagging at you, what's bothering you, what's causing you to be, diminished or maybe not at your best optimal health. So organizational psychologists are focused on how to optimize the world of work for individuals, for groups, for leaders, etc., so that the organization thrives as a whole. And what that often requires is I'm going to be working with individuals, often like you might as an organization or as a clinical psychologist, helping them to understand their limiting beliefs, how their behaviors and communication styles are either contributing or detracting from good relationships, from being able to motivate people to their highest sense of performance and sense of belonging, psychological security. So part of it is building the acumen of leaders to be stronger individuals who then can lead in a more effective way, building stronger teams, being able to develop the skill set of the individual people inside those organizations so that they can be at their higher potential, their higher optimal performance.
That is fascinating. So, before we leave, what does a working on purpose organization or workplace or world can look like?
Well, I'd like to talk about creating destination workplaces. And this is where people have learned about these organizations because they're known. They're known for doing good work in the world where they're doing something that betters the world, not detracts from it. Their leaders are inspirational and transformational. They're out to help people realize their greatness and contribute that in a way that allows them to realize more of their fuller potential. So these organizations are destination because people are drawn to them. They're clamoring to get in. They're vying to be able to be referred to, brought in. And once they get the interview and they get hired, they don't want to leave. And because they feel so great and part of this organization, like together they're bigger than the sum of their parts, they persevere, they give their best efforts, and they tend to tell their friends, you got to come work with this organization, it's the best. And then, of course, as I said before, they don't want to leave.
Yeah, they don't want to leave. I don't want you to leave, but I did promise you a 15-minute show, a segment. So I want to thank you for being on the show. And how can people learn more about you, what you do, how you are the Chief Ignition Officer? What's the best way for people to reach out and stay in touch?
Oh, thanks, Monica. Definitely. You can go to my chief business website, which is gusto-now.com. That's where you'll find out about my leadership programs, the academy, etc. You can go to my personal website, alisecortez.com, and find out just all about my books, etc. And you can always find me on LinkedIn by my first and last name.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. Hold on just a second. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today on the Powerhouse Woman Show. I know you've heard something that was an aha moment for you. You're going to understand deeply, more deeply about what it means to work and live on purpose. So thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week on the Powerhouse Woman Show.